We are going to have a look today at who people say Jesus is. Who do people say Jesus is? This was a question that was asked at the time of Jesus, but it's also a question that's asked these days. There's Avatar Jesus. Little bit complicated. Avatar, what is an avatar? The god Vishnu exists in the Hindu religion, and the god Vishnu sometimes turns up as different people. And those different people that he turns up as are called avatars. And so what happens in the Hindu religion is that Jesus shows up, and many people think, well, Jesus is just an avatar. He is a god, small g, and he is a god among the other gods. This is not what Christianity believes. But this is what some people who come from their Hinduism and engage with Christianity, they say, oh, I can believe in Christianity, I can take it on, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to have this small Jesus who kind of goes alongside Vishnu, who goes alongside the other avatars, and he's just a god alongside all the other gods. This is not true. So be very careful when you're hearing me say this, because I'm communicating what I understand to be true, and this is not true. I've lived in Pakistan, which is near to India, and people would talk about this, and this is not what I believe. Also, there are different cultural interpretations. What does Jesus look like? Well, I've seen The Chosen. And because I've seen The Chosen, Jesus looks like that. Really? I'm not alien to The Chosen. I don't hate The Chosen, and I realize it's a TV show. It is not gospel truth. And as a TV show, it shows Jesus a particular way. Now, some people who are African American or from Africa represent Jesus as having black hair, black skin, and dark brown eyes, and he is black. And many of us Europeans say, no, 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 Jesus was not that way. Jesus had blonde hair, blue eyes, and he was extremely white because he came from Germany, apparently. Well, no, that might be an error one way, but we've got an error the other way if we think that Jesus was very, very German. Jesus is from Asia. Now, when I say Jesus is from Asia, I'm not talking about the Far East Asian. My daughter's from Asia. She's working out there today. She is Chinese, and Chinese people look a certain way. He is not Chinese. He is from the Near East. He is from Israel. He is Jewish. So if Jesus is Jewish, that gives us an idea of the real kind of person he was. He lived in Israel. We've got books written about his real life and what he really did. But Bart Ehrman, I don't know how many of you will have heard of Bart Ehrman, but Bart Ehrman went to a terrible, horrible school called the Moody Bible Institute. Who might have been at the Moody Bible Institute? Oh, me. I am a teacher at the Moody Bible Institute, and Bart Ehrman went there a while before I was there. Now, if you know Bart Ehrman, he is a theology professor. Yay, that sounds great. He went to Moody, and I've read what he wrote about Moody, and he said Moody was the pits. Why? Because he said we didn't teach him about who Jesus really was. He said that when he went to Wheaton, he was able to question and go further. And then when he went further on and did his doctorate, he was able to give up on the faith altogether. Now, hear what I'm saying. He was able to pretty much give up on the faith altogether. He does not believe that Jesus died and rose again. He does not believe that salvation comes only through Jesus. He would say that he's an agnostic at best and probably an atheist. Now, I do not teach that at Moody. I teach about biblical Christianity, and I teach that the Bible is true. And what I'm going to communicate to you today comes out of the Bible. There may be other things that I bring to it from the culture and things like that. That is the ancient culture and what we see about the ancient world. But really, the Bible's words are absolutely true, and I believe that. So Bart Ehrman is not in line with what I think. In fact, we're going to look at Matthew 16, verses 13 through 23. So let's look at Matthew 16, verses 13 through 28. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said. That shall never happen to you." Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, and you do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done. Truly, I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." So the main idea from this sermon is the kingdom of God is about Jesus as the Messiah and his death and resurrection. At the time when Peter is saying this, he doesn't really understand what he's saying. Yes, it is revealed by God. I accept that. The Bible tells us that. But then when Jesus starts to explain what the Messiah has to do, Peter says, no, and Jesus rebukes him. So that's the main idea behind this passage. But where does it all take place? Where does this occur? In Caesarea Philippi. Now, a few years ago, I went to Caesarea Philippi, and I was surprised by where it was, because I went there on a Jewish field trip, and I'd been to Jerusalem, and I went to Galilee, and then we got on the bus, and we started just to go north. And we went out of the main Israeli territory. And we went to a place called Caesarea because it was a town given to Caesar. Now, if you think of Israel, you don't generally think of that as towns given to Caesar in Israel. But somebody gave Caesar this whole town, and it was called Caesarea. Slight problem. There were 2 towns in Israel that were given to Caesar. One was on the coast, and that was called Caesarea. This one was inland, and it was called Caesarea, and then it was called Philippi after Herod Philip. So Herod Philip, they put their first name, their last name at the beginning, so Herod, and then they put their first name second, Philip. So it's Caesarea Philippi. What you got to ask yourself is, why on earth is Jesus taking his disciples, who are meant to be following God, to a place like this? Why would he wander outside of main part of Jerusalem and Samaria? And why would he march out of Galilee? And why would he go to this place? Well, it had a god there, but it was the god Jupiter. It was the god who was in charge of the Roman way of life. That's not good. And then it also had the god Pan. Now, if you think of Pan has little horns. So if you know who God is, he's the God with little horns. He also has a goat-like face, and he has hooves. Who do you know in your religion who's frequently drawn with horns, has a goat-like kind of face, and hooves? Satan. Now, the Bible does not say anywhere that this is what Satan looks like. In fact, Satan manifests himself as an angel of light in some places. But this is actually an idea that came out of this locale here, because they had a temple to Pan, and the temple of Pan was built over a stream, and the stream opened into the gates of hell because it just disappeared. It didn't get all nasty and horrible and green and terrible. It just disappeared into the ground. But then it would come out about 40, 50 yards down, and they would actually cut the throat of something, put it in the water, and if the water came out red, it was a good omen, and if it came out clear, it was a bad omen, or vice versa. I can't quite remember. But you don't have to do that, so it's not really important that you remember. But Jesus is taking his people to the gates of hell. That's what this place was. But it was the gates of Hades. So I read from my version that he took them to this place, and that the gates of Hades will not stand. So it was an opening to the afterlife. Not that nasty place that the devil's meant to live with all his little demons. That is a modern idea that doesn't come out of the Bible. But really, this is an idea of the afterlife, of hell, and you've got the gates of Hades. And then you had a temple to Jupiter. And then a little bit further from the temple to Jupiter, you had the city of Banios. So you had these Banios, you had Jupiter, you had Hades. What on earth is Jesus doing here? You'd expect him to be by the temple. You'd expect him to be on top of a mountain. You'd expect him to be somewhere. Why is he speaking here? Because he knows what he's going to say. And what he says, the physical location has a big impetus on this. It really backs it up. So, Peter confesses that Jesus is the Messiah or the Christ. Let's read that first paragraph again. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Then he strictly charged his disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ. So, Jesus asks a question to begin with. This is important, because many of you come to be lectured to on a Sunday morning. It's kind of a lecture. I'm preaching, I'm talking to you, and what I say is true. Unfortunately, you will remember about 10 to 15% of this wonderful sermon this morning. And that's if it's good. So maybe if I'm preaching, it'll be 10%. Well, what's the point of preaching? Because I proclaim, because I say, and when you hear it, you feel encouraged and you feel moved towards God. That is the point of preaching. So Pastor Mike, when he gets up here, is not wasting his time. You may remember more. Things may come to you during the week. It is good to be in a sermon on a Sunday morning. That is good. But we have small groups. And I do not know many of you, and I do not know all the small groups. So I do not know if you go to a small group. So this is not personal. I am not going for you. But I'm going to let you know. If you go to a small group, somebody's going to know your name. If you go to a small group, you're going to have a conversation, and you can't remain hidden anymore. Because small groups are places where I teach and also Don teaches, and we have a small group, And then people will ask us questions. And we'll start to go back and forth. And we may not have all the answers, and we may have to go and find out some things because it becomes dialogical. And that's what's happening here. Jesus does have the answers, but he's asking questions so that a dialogue will occur. And they'll go deeper. Now, did you know that you can go deeper again? In the next chapter, it goes deeper again. Because Jesus goes off with 3 of the disciples, Peter, James, and John. When you go off with 3 people, you're going to have a conversation. Now, Peter doesn't know what he's talking about again in that passage. And he starts to want to build an altar. But the fact that he's there and the fact that Jesus takes him there is he gets to see what Jesus is about. He gets to talk of what Jesus is about. So maybe we need times like this when we're asked questions. Maybe we need times like this when we go deeper. They are talking about the people, about the crowds. Now, there are the Pharisees and Sadducees. The Sadducees didn't believe in the life ever after. That's why they were Sadducee, yes, ha, 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 ha. Right. But they didn't believe in the life ever after. Now, they did believe in the Old Testament, and they had a way to believe in the books of the Pentateuch, and they followed the books of the Pentateuch. They just didn't believe that there was a life ever after. The Pharisees believed in a life ever after. There were different groups in Israel talking with each other, and Jesus did not talk like one of them. So you could go and have a conversation with Jesus, but talk to the hand. I am not going to go and talk with Jesus, because Jesus is saying some strange stuff. Now, was Jesus basing what he said on the Old Testament? Absolutely. Was Jesus interpreting the Old Testament correctly? Absolutely. But he would then interact with people, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the teachers of the law would shut him out. But the crowds would follow. Now, we have a crowd here. You're like the crowd. And in this crowd, I'm sure there's at least one person who is interested in their wife or husband and has come for them. Now, do they believe about Jesus? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, big deal. But I come here to keep my wife happy. I come here to keep my husband happy. That's a little bit of what the crowd's like here. They're coming along to hear Jesus. They're coming along to see what Jesus is going to say. And the crowd moves along through the Gospels, and they're paying attention. But then Jesus says some things, and the crowd departs, and only the disciples remain. And it's the disciples that you're called to be like. It's the disciples who are following Jesus. And Jesus talks to the disciples and he says, who are these crowds? Who are they saying that I am? They say, John the Baptist. All right, that's a little bit difficult because John the Baptist has been beheaded. But that's what they say. They say John the Baptist. John the Baptist at this time had recently been beheaded. Not a lot of people would have seen John the Baptist, and not a lot of people would have seen Jesus. They would have heard about him, and then they go, oh, he's John the Baptist come back to life. Why? Because he's preaching powerfully, because he's preaching mightily, just like John the Baptist. And John the Baptist spoke so fearlessly that John the Baptist got killed. All right, that's the first one. Who else is he speaking like? Elijah. Elijah is alive. Now, if you know the Old Testament, Elijah is taken up, and he's taken into heaven, and he is with God. So Elijah is at least alive. And they say, well, it's Elijah. Why would they say Elijah? Well, Elijah was a powerful person who spoke against the king, who spoke against the rulers and said, Israel, you need to obey God and you need to go this way. And Jesus is speaking with the same authority. So maybe Elijah. And then there's Jeremiah. Jeremiah told the king the truth, and the king cut it up and put it in the fire. Jeremiah was thrown into a pit and he was just left there. Jeremiah suffered, and Jeremiah spoke the truth to the kings. Jeremiah spoke the truth to authority, and that's what Jesus is doing. So they said, that's who they say you are. Makes sense. Crowd. And then Jesus says, okay, disciples, come a little bit closer. Disciples, come a little bit nearer. Who do you say I am? Who do you say I am? And then Peter jumps up. Peter comes to the front. He says, you are the Christ. You are the Messiah. You are the Son of God. Ding, 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 ding. Alarms go off. Jesus is happy. This is true. Jesus is happy. He says, God revealed that to you. I am the Messiah. I am the Christ. I am the Son of God. This is true. And you are Peter. Now, what does Peter mean? Rock. You are the rock. And upon this rock, I will build my church. I'm going to set this up now. How many former Catholics or Catholics do we have in the room? Okay, there you go. Peter. Peter was the first pope. And this is where the Catholics get this from. They say, well, Peter spoke the truth, and then Jesus set him up as the first pope, and then he set up the next pope, and then he set up the next pope, and then he... Unfortunately, that's not true. What happened was that Peter was being set up, yes, and Peter preached the gospel to the Jewish people in Jerusalem. And then the gospel spread to Samaria, and it hadn't really taken a hold until Peter was called, and Peter communicated the gospel in Samaria. And then Cornelius becomes a Christian, and Peter preaches the gospel to Cornelius, and Cornelius is a Roman centurion. So you've got Jerusalem, Samaria, the ends of the earth. You are Peter, and upon this rock, upon the rock of what you've confessed, that I am the Messiah, that I am amazing, that I am fantastic, you're going to communicate that, and you're going to communicate it in Jerusalem, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. And that's what Peter does. Now, there are other people who say, well, it's the words, and it's the words that are important. This is somewhere where, as Moody taught me, I will pat the pulpit. Now, when I say that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, I will pound the pulpit, because that is absolutely true. But when I say that Peter is the rock, and he is the rock, not the words that he says, and it goes Jerusalem, Samaria, the ends of the earth, I will pat the pulpit, because it is probably what the passage means. But if you believe differently, explain it to me afterwards, and we'll go for that. You are the Messiah, Son of the living God. Peter is shown this by the Father. Simon, son of Jonah, is Peter the rock, and on him the church will be founded. The gates of hell. Now, in this passage, it doesn't mean the gates where Satan is. That's a modern way of thinking about hell. Satan is not in hell yet. Satan is roaming around this world. Satan is not everywhere. Satan is roaming around this world. So, Satan comes into this passage, and we'll talk about that later. But the gates of hell means the gates of Hades. It means the gates of the afterworld. It means the gates of death. Death will not stand against him. Death will not stand against Peter, because Peter will proclaim the truth, and Jesus will embody that truth. Peter has authority then to bind what God binds and to do what God tells him to do, and he will do it powerfully. And we see that in the book of Acts. If you read the book of Acts, when Peter speaks, Ananias and Sapphira, well, not Ananias and Sapphira, but there are people within the book of Acts who die because Jesus is speaking through Peter. And that's the power of Peter's words. So compare this to Gandhi. That was a bit of a jump, wasn't it? Yes. Gandhi. What did Gandhi say? Well, Gandhi said this: religion is one tree with many branches. As branches, you may say that religions are many, but as a tree, religion is only one. Sounds great. Apart from it's not true. But it sounds great because it's got nice words that seem to fit together, and they compose a sentence, and the sentence seems to make sense to us. But actually, this is not true. And the person who sees that it's all one tree is Gandhi. So Gandhi is saying, oh yes, well, you all don't have the truth, but I have the truth. All religions are part of the great religion, and the great religion actually in this is Hinduism. There are people who were with Gandhi at the time who knew that Gandhi wasn't necessarily speaking the truth. Now, many of us will say, well, Gandhi's a nice person. Really? Well, yes, he was nice to his mother, I guess. He didn't have a lot of clothes, and he had a spinning wheel, so he must have been a nice guy. Being a nice guy doesn't get you to heaven. In fact, each of us here are not good enough to get even the first step towards heaven. No one is righteous, not even one. So Gandhi was not righteous, and Gandhi was not seeing a part of the religion or the whole of the religion that exists. Muhammad Ali Jinnah lived with Gandhi. And Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was a Muslim, said, I have nothing to do with this pseudo-religious approach that Gandhi is advocating. So Gandhi was a nice guy, and because he was a nice guy compared to us, we tend to think he was saying nice things. But his religion was identified by the Muslim who was living with him as being incorrect. So what does a Muslim believe? Hazrat Isa. I lived in Pakistan, and I debated with Muslims regularly about Hazrat Isa. Hazrat Isa is Jesus in Islam. Islamic people do believe in Jesus. They believe that Jesus was born and that he lived on earth. And when it came to the end of his life, he was such a truth teller and so important to Allah that God then took him away when he was going to be crucified and put Judas on the cross. Nice story, untrue. It's untrue. So all religions do not believe a basic truth, because Hinduism there has all religions leading to Rome, and then this one has, well, yeah, there's Jesus, but he isn't who you say he is. Well, what about the Dalai Lama? The Dalai Lama says, well, religion is simple. My religion is simple. My religion is kindness. Again, at first blush, it sounds nice. My religion is kindness. What's your definition of kindness? Being nice to my mum. I'm glad you're nice to my mum. Well, what else do you do? Oh, I give flowers to the lady down the street. What else do you do? Well, I cussed or swore when I was about 15 just to see how it sounded. Well, that's not kind. Yeah, but I got over it. Well, what else did you do? Well, I slept with girls in my 20s. Yeah, that doesn't sound very kind, actually. Girls. There's more than one girl that you treated badly as you went through that time. Well, what else did you do? Well, I do actually get the dinner sometimes for my wife. So I'm kind. Yeah, but what do you do about all the bad things that you did? Do they make us evil? Matthew 7:11 says, you, even though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children. Jesus calls the people listening to the Sermon on the Mount evil. Wait, what? Yeah, you just have to look it up. It's in your Bible. But you see, we don't know our Bibles well enough. And so my religion is kindness. Being nice like that will not get you to heaven. Emma Thompson goes a little bit further. Emma Thompson is the actress. And she says, I am an atheist. I suppose you can call me a sort of libertarian anarchist. I regard religion with fear and suspicion. It's not enough to say that I don't believe in God. I actually regard the system as distressing. I am offended by some of the things said in the Bible and the Quran and refute them. If everybody gets to heaven, why would God have her in heaven when she doesn't want to be there? That sounds like a cruel God to me, not a gracious God. She would have to change Emma Thompson's mind and have to make Emma Thompson think. It would be mind control. But some people believe that. In the end, everybody will get to heaven. No, they won't. Because some people don't want to be in heaven. And really, it's whether you've chosen Jesus Christ or not, whether you are actually depending on him for your eternal life. Barbara Walters. First of all, the Jewish religion has a lot in common with the Christian religion because, as Rabbi Gilman points out in the show, Christianity was based in Judaism. Christ was Jewish. Yes, but you've entirely missed the point. He was Jewish, yes. It has a lot of basis in the Old Testament. Absolutely, we have an Old Testament, yes. And we have a New Testament. The Old Testament is true, yes. and the New Testament. And so it has a respect for Judaism. It has an honor for Judaism. And it adds to Judaism the New Testament Christianity, which is really founded in the Old Testament. And so this is the way it develops. Jesus is a departure from the many ways of Gandhi. Jesus has nothing to do with the word salads of people like Deepak Chopra. Have you ever heard Deepak Chopra? He will say things that are absolutely ridiculous. And he will say them with a very serious face. And people who know anything say, oh, could you please be quiet because you're not making any sense. And then he'll say something else. It's crazy. The religion of Jesus is more than kindness. It's not kindness. It's so much more than that. If your faith is a non-starter, then Jesus is nothing to you, and you can't depend on him for salvation. There are some indicators in Judaism of who Jesus is, but who is he? There's so much more written about him in the New Testament. So how would we apply this? How would we put it into practice? It's important to not only know about Jesus, but to relate to Jesus. Through the Spirit, we can talk to him. Now, just think about this, about knowing who Jesus is. There is Peter. There is James. There is John. And there's Judas. And Judas is at the back, and I'm going to betray Jesus someday. I'm just going to get, I just can't wait to get my 30 pieces of silver. You'd kind of spot who Judas was at that point, wouldn't you? When they're all walking down, and you've got the righteous ones at the front, and at the back you've got Judas just waiting for his 30 pieces of silver. It wasn't like that. Judas knew who Jesus said he was and didn't actually believe it to the effect that he betrayed Jesus. That was a terrible thing to do. And he was living with Jesus. Just because you're in church, it doesn't make you a Christian. Just because you've heard the gospel doesn't mean you've responded to it. In fact, there's a Moody Bible Institute student who went through our program 4 years, worked for Moody Radio. He's called Young Thunder, if ever you listen to Moody in the mornings. And Young Thunder became a Christian years after he'd been through Moody Bible Institute. Now, he's very, very grateful that he found Christ. But you see how somebody can know so much and know so little. It is important to see that Jesus is sent by God. He is God's solution to our problems. Our problems are caused by sin, and Jesus is God's righteousness. So there is a righteousness sent by God in the person of Jesus Christ. How much did he sin? Not at all. How much did he fall short? Not at all. And he died, and he didn't have to. There was nothing that compelled him to be killed. But he died so that your sin may be nailed to him and forgiven. And then he was raised again. It was even better than that because of mercy and grace. Through grace, you have a life with Christ that you can live out. The question is, are you living out that life? Do you know God's grace? Do you know his mercy? Does it set your heart on fire? Jesus is God's own son. He was the firstborn. Now let me communicate that. Firstborn doesn't mean he was born first. It means he was the person who got the firstborn inheritance. So Jesus gets the inheritance. Through him we inherit the things that God has in store for us. Have you inherited that? Have you got that joy? Have you got that assurance in your soul? People in the world get Jesus wrong. We have to get him right. And our getting him right has to increase over time. I became a Christian when I was 7 years old. My people at my church just sent me a paper and they said, "Are you a Christian?" And I drew a picture of a door and myself halfway through it. I wasn't a Christian. My mother explained it to me. I gave my heart to Jesus at 7. Then I went to a secular, it said it was Church of England, but it was very, very aggressive in favor of liberal Christianity. And they argued against the Bible and they argued against faith really quite powerfully. And I didn't know why, but I held on to the gospel and I couldn't argue it at that time. It was attacked and attacked and attacked. Then I went to Moody again as a student, and Moody began to straighten out my thoughts and began to give me a good way to think again. But God held hold of me. God is the order of my salvation. God is the one I'm depending on. If I didn't depend on God and I depended on myself, I would have fluctuated one way or the other. But God is rock solid, and my faith was in God. So Peter rebukes the Messiah for embracing death and resurrection. Peter corrects Jesus. Let's read this. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." Then Jesus told his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done. Truly, I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." And then the next passage is about Jesus coming in his kingdom because it's about the transfiguration. But Jesus explains what's going to happen in Jerusalem. I'm going to die. I will suffer, you will suffer, and then I will die. Yay for the hero who's going to die. They didn't have any framework for that. And Peter, because he doesn't have a good understanding of what the Messiah is, steps in and says to Jesus, in effect, "Over my dead body, you are not going to die. That is not going to happen." And Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." Is he calling him Satan? Well, Satan has a meaning, and I think in this Bible it's got a capital S, and I am not sure it should have a capital S. It does not mean I am contradicting the Bible. The Bible in the original languages is without error. But then we have different translations. And some translations will put this with a small s, and some will put it with a large S. And what I would say is with a small s, Jesus is saying, "Get behind me, my adversary. Get behind me, the person who is tempting me." Jesus is sorely tempted at this point. Why? He doesn't want to suffer. He doesn't get up in the morning and think, "Oh, could I put a drill through my hand? Oh, that's nice. Oh, can I put nails through my feet? That would be great. Oh, shall I nail myself to a cross? That would be wonderful." Jesus does not want to do that, but he wants to save you and me. He wants to save humanity. And so he says, "Get behind me, Satan." Peter had a conquering king in his mind. Somebody who was amazing and fantastic, who would set up an empire, probably in Israel, and that empire would stand, and then the Jewish people would be brought under that, and the Jewish people would then preach the gospel to the nations, and the nations would come and serve under King Jesus in Jerusalem. That's probably what Peter thought. And Jesus says, "No, I'm going to die. I'm going to die." Jesus does not compromise, and he calls Peter an adversary. And then he says, "Whoever follows me needs to be worthy to suffer." That does not sound like a grand gospel that says you're going to get rich quick. It is quite the humble gospel which says, are you prepared to die? Are you? Are you prepared to walk with Jesus even if Jesus takes you to a place that you preach the gospel and they kill you? Good. Because if you are, then you are worthy to be my disciple, says Jesus. If you're not, then goodbye. It's a dividing point. You're my disciple, go with me, you may be killed. You're not my disciple, preserve your life over there and you'll lose everything. Because you will die one day, and then you'll meet God. And God will say to you, did you follow Jesus? And you will say, no, I kind of had this, I was going to leave it until I was old. What a stupid idea. You don't know if you're going to get hit by a car tomorrow. Oh, yeah, well, I was going to see if the right arguments came together. How are the arguments that you're dealing with? Oh, well, no, now. Now is when Jesus is calling you to follow him. Now is your time of decision. So now we need to choose to follow Jesus. What gains do you have in your life? The Son of Man will come in glory. Could come tomorrow. Could come next week. Could come in 3 years, 5 years, 50 years' time. When he comes, are you ready? Are you going to be brought into the air to meet Jesus? Are you going to be ready to meet Jesus, however that happens? There are many ways to understand Revelation, but the thing in Revelation is Jesus wins. Are you ready for that? You see, some people want Jesus to be other than the stories that he tells us. There is a person called Serene Jones. I just found her on the internet this week. She is the president of Union Theological Seminary. She is training up ministers. And she says that the question of the resurrection is too difficult to answer, too difficult for her to work out. She does not believe that Jesus was raised from the dead. And Paul says in the Bible that if you believe that, then you are in a pretty dire straits, because Christians have to believe that Jesus was raised from the dead. Well, what about Paul Tillich? Paul Tillich is a great theologian of the Lutheran world. I have read some of Paul Tillich, and I read him because I had to in my seminary studies. Paul Tillich was a Lutheran theologian who eventually gave up that there was any resurrection of Jesus. He said that there are many reasons to doubt the resurrection of Jesus. And then there's John Shelby Spong. He was a minister in the Anglican Church. He was involved in something called the Jesus Seminar, who read the Gospels and said, well, that doesn't look very naturalist. Now, naturalist isn't what he thought necessarily, but naturalist is a way that people believe things. So he had this way of filtering things and putting them through, and he gave up on the resurrection of Jesus quite early in his life, actually, and this was just confirmation of it. The resurrection of Jesus is so important. It is so paramount. Jesus came and he was the Messiah, and he died, and then he was resurrected after 3 days. That is an historical fact. As an historical fact, I have put my faith in it, and I am following that historical fact, and Jesus has not let me down. Jesus has shaped me. Jesus has sent me through trials. Jesus has done all kinds of things to me, but he has never left me, and he has not let me down. How about you? Do you follow Jesus? Do you know what it is to follow him? Do Jesus' words bother us? Do we deny them or let them have their full power? I am going to die and I am going to be raised again. Are you going to follow me through that? Is Jesus the Messiah, who is a great conquering king through his death and resurrection? How many other people have died and then been raised by God? Oh, there are a few of them in the Bible. But did they have the same effect as Jesus? No, the Bible points to Jesus above and beyond anybody else. So do you believe it? Do you believe it? Because if you believe it, it should be changing your life. I had anxiety and depression. With my anxiety and depression, I had to come to Jesus. And Jesus took me on a 7-year journey where my anxiety and depression got dealt with. Nothing stays the same when it comes in contact with Jesus. I'm not promising that if you have anxiety and depression, Jesus will heal you from that, but he will change the circumstances. Are we denying ourselves to follow Jesus? Jesus calls you to follow him. Do you put things to the side to say, Jesus, I'm going to follow you? Or do you just zone out in front of the television and watch that until you go to bed? Do you just go shopping to get rid of the difficulties in your life? Do you consider others before yourself, and does your love for God drive you to him, where you have a despair in your body and you think, I have to walk with Jesus? Because Jesus is the answer. Jesus is the way that I have been told to get to God. And I am not going to follow any other religion because they do not have the answer of Jesus. The kingdom of God is about Jesus as Messiah and his death and resurrection. The kingdom of God is about Jesus as Messiah and his death and resurrection. Matthew 16:13 through 28 presents us with Christianity's central paradox: strength through weakness, life through death, glory through suffering. The Son of Man will come again in glory. The book of Revelation tells us that many details, but it does major on the fact that in the end, God wins. Do you know Jesus as the Christ or the Messiah? Do you know what his death and his resurrection mean? Let's pray.